The video game industry has a fundamental misunderstanding of what makes an experience cinematic. There's no other medium quite like video games. It has a lot in common with film, but the key difference that separates the two is interaction.
What are you doing?
It's alright.
A movie will utilize picture and sound to invoke an emotional reaction from its audience, but video games require player input to affect the outcome of the overall experience. When these three elements work together, video games transcend their medium and become an emotional experience worth remembering. In the very same way cinema can grab your attention and successfully make your life as you know it disappear, video games can too. Think back to some of your favorite moments that really left a lasting impression. Moments where you empathized with characters. Moments where you reflected on all the decisions that led you there. Moments that have left such a strong impact, your mind goes back there whenever you remember that game. These moments stay with you because in some sense, you went through it too. You made conscious decisions in gameplay that resulted in consequences that you subconsciously accept as your own. I'm willing to bet none of your most memorable moments probably happened during a cutscene.
Yeah. You owe me a pizza.
I think a majority of the industry believes these immersive cinematic moments are only possible during this downtime. After all, they do resemble a Hollywood production, but video games are not movies. When players are given agency to explore at their own pace, it makes the world feel all the more real because it's all experienced firsthand. The framing of these scenes borrow from the cinematic language of shot composition. It only confirms what you're doing is really important, despite your only contribution being holding forward on a control stick. Valve seems to understand the importance of interactivity over cutscenes better than any other company. Gameplay will rarely be interrupted solely for a cutscene to play for the sake of exposition. Instead, the story is told at the player's pace, which allows the narrative to be delivered more naturally. There's a phrase commonly used in the film industry that applies to video games as well: show, don't tell.
Everybody got that?
In other words, why should characters tell us how they feel when we can see it ourselves through actions, decisions, or environment?
You can't just have your characters announce how they feel. That makes me feel angry!
Environmental storytelling can be a powerful tool to convey emotions that words simply cannot. That's not to say cutscenes don't have a place in the industry, because there are a multitude of examples that prove otherwise. Video games must strike a healthy balance between the two. QuickTime events don't count, and neither do forced walking sections. But developers seem to favor spectacle over anything else, regardless of which method they choose. I can only assume in an effort to emulate popular blockbuster movies, some video games have resorted to using gimmicky action set pieces to invoke a cheap reaction from players, instead of earning it through thoughtful game design. It's gotten so out of hand that some of this fluff has spilled over to non-action games. The Resident Evil remakes are a prime example of how these modern conventions negatively impact the overall experience. Let me preface this next statement by saying I thoroughly enjoyed the RE2 and 4 remakes as a standalone experience, but compared to the originals, they don't come close to capturing the dense atmosphere of those early titles.
Hello? Is anybody here?
Why do most high-profile releases prioritize high-octane action over intimate moments that immerse you in their world? The answer may shock some of you, but developing AAA titles has gotten really expensive.
Money!
The revenue video games generate don't rival, but skyrocket past the music and film industries combined. Naturally, they would borrow the aesthetics of the previous leading industry. Gaming is no longer a niche hobby, and has broken through mainstream media like no other has. The latest Hollywood blockbuster's budget can range anywhere between $100 to $200 million. Video games are not too far behind. Take Breath of the Wild for instance, Nintendo's biggest project to date. Over 300 people are credited, and its development time spanned 5 years to complete. In a shareholder meeting, Miyamoto explained that in order to cover the production cost, they needed to sell a minimum of 2 million copies. Despite later becoming a launch title for the Switch, the game was originally developed with the Wii U in mind. Regardless, both systems are generations behind Microsoft and Sony's hardware. If Nintendo themselves could not avoid exceeding a $100 million budget on their weaker systems, then it's abundantly clear the industry has entered a brand new era of game development. Whenever a movie trailer releases for a seemingly unnecessary remake, the comments online are usually flooded with naysayers claiming the studio has run dry of ideas. But video games are quite the opposite. Remakes are generally celebrated and highly requested. Like Hollywood, the video game industry cannot sustain itself with original AAA titles alone, which is why now more than ever we're seeing remakes from beloved classics to help circumvent the strain AAA games cause to development pipelines. This past year, Nintendo's first-party output consisted of 13 titles, 5 of which were either remakes or remasters. Sequels and prequels made up 6 entries, leaving only 2 wholly original titles that year: Super Mario Bros. Wonder and Everybody 1-2 Switch. One could make the argument that Nintendo's 7-year-old system is being milked for all it's worth before the release of its successor, but take a look at Sony and Microsoft's output and you'll see a similar pattern. The market has gotten so oversaturated that companies have resorted to remaking titles that are barely a decade old. Can the industry sustain this rising cost of AAA development once this well dries up? As expensive as video games have become to produce, unlike movies, their budget isn't entirely eaten up by hiring A-list actors. Usually. There's a common misconception about technical advancement that gamers share. It's the belief that greater hardware capabilities equals new and exciting gameplay innovations, but this could not be further from the truth.
I have to go now. My planet needs me.
In actuality, the more hardware advances, the more investor funding increases, which restricts developers from taking those risks that are essential for innovation. By default, these high-end titles are millions of dollars in the negative, and that's not even factoring in the cost of advertisement. In order for these games to break even, they need to appeal to a general audience, which often means prioritizing non-consequential technical elements like graphics, over-the-top cinematics. And fuck it, why not? An open world. Despite the millions of dollars sunk into these bloated projects, very rarely will a current-gen game be doing something mechanically that a 360 couldn't handle. That's probably why we're starting to see remakes from that generation especially. I don't want this video to be misconstrued as yet another tired take about the sad state of modern gaming. It's not inherently bad that video games are broadening their audience. Newcomers should feel welcomed, but not at the cost of homogenizing gameplay and narrative. Video games are in the unique position of being the only medium entirely dependent on interaction. This element is vital to maintain the intimate connection with players that make for the most memorable moments. It's an interesting time in both industries when they are mutually benefiting from one another. A few years ago, any mention of video game and movie in the same sentence would yield a negative connotation, but now it's favored a bit more optimistically. It helps that a lot of the properties being adapted for film and television have taken the most inspiration from it. However, a lot of these adaptations lean too heavy on fan service and boil down to Easter egg hunting. Look, it's that thing I remember. When I see Tom Holland dangling from an airplane carrier, I don't think, oh no, how's he gonna get himself out of this one? I thought back to the video game where I thought, okay, how am I going to make it back safely? Video games restrict what the medium is capable of when strictly pursuing the aesthetics of film, while neglecting the mechanics of interactivity. Video games don't need to be like movies as much as movies don't need to be like paintings. Each art form has been able to grow and push their medium forward by borrowing elements from those that preceded it. As budgets increase exponentially, the industry seems to have set their sights on emulating the lucrative business of movies, but in that pursuit lost track of why people play video games to begin with. No one wants their gameplay interrupted for some drawn-out cutscene to play. No one wants to be treated like a baby and have keys dangled in front of them. And no one wants video games to become movies.
Hi, my name is David.
No one.
Merry Christmas, you filthy animal.
I told you to clean your room. What are you doing?
Making a movie.
What, your boring little life?
Yes, but it's not boring. It's the adventures of a young superhero named Ernest.
And that's you?
Mm-hmm. And that's Dad, and that's Mom, and that's the dog.
Where's the more intelligent older brother?
He's dead.
Dead?
Dead. He fell off a dock and sing too.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes.
Can you bring him back?
Of course. But why should I?
sacred code.